Hi, everyone. We're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I am Dr. Kristen.
I'm Dr. Erin.
You are very welcome to the conversation we're having today. We are educators and PhDs with social science degrees who are obsessed with culture, both popped and lived. And we educate about society, which is what social scientists do, via those cultural conversations. We talk about everything from systemic racism to the body sizes in Bridgerton and everything in between. We adore having conversations with each other, obviously, but we hit record for you. So in any way that you can join us in this conversation, we want you to.
This video is a part of our hot-ish takes series. Unlike other outlets that love those hot takes, we prefer to take our time just a little bit, maybe do some research, reflect on our thoughts and feelings before we bring you those thoughts and feelings and dive into that topic. So it's hot, but also kind of ish. And as we were talking about filming this particular video, parts of this video, given how ancient the historical context is quite arctically cold. So today we want to spend this hottish takes talking to you about the PBS documentary series Asian America, yes.
Yeah.
That was a 2019 production, I think.
My PBS app says 2020.
It's
so
2019, 2020. It was recently made available free to stream on PBS's websites, your local PBS station, after the incidents of hate crime that happened in Atlanta a few weeks back. So it had been produced and available and possibly aired, but they are bringing it back into the conversation, given the, specifically over the last year, but then in the last 2 weeks, discussion of rising incidents of hate crimes against Asian Americans as a way that we can all educate ourselves about the experience of Asian immigrants and Asian Americans in these contiguous states and abroad. And folks, it's not happy news. Spoiler alert. It's
Here
not.
are the things I knew about the Asian American experience prior to this 5-part documentary, which we need to thank Cheryl Westlung for bringing to our attention, our colleague and friend down at Baylor University. 1, I knew that I really liked most Asian food. 2, I knew that we interned Japanese folks during World War II. Thank you, George Takei.
Thank you, George Takei. Yep.
I knew that Chinese folks built the railroad and we treated them really terribly. I knew that we were probably generally racist all the time against them. And I think that might be it in terms of specificity.
Yeah, I mean,
I know that the women of Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos were largely objectified during the Vietnam War, and that the children of those relationships by American GIs have a particularly tumultuous existence, as like how the GIs just left and didn't ever and all that stuff. So I knew that. I think that's my limit on specificity, though.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm much different than you on that. I certainly knew about Japanese internment camps, both from George Takei's play, but I also did some research into internment camps during my PhD. So I read several articles on the material culture of Japanese internment camps, which is fascinating. But as we were talking about while we were watching this together but apart, when they get to the episode about the Second World War and Japanese internment camps, they talk about one being in southeastern Colorado. And I grew up in Colorado, not far from southeastern Colorado, and do not remember learning about the internment camp at all. And so for me, that was one of those, like, the lens through which we view our history on this land and the history of all the peoples that come together on it. I was taught a lot about the Native and Indigenous folks that originated on the land that became the state of Colorado, and continued to live there and engage with the colonizers and the settlers. But did I ever learn about Japanese internment in my home state? I did not. So, like, even stuff I did know in this documentary, which I think was what was so great about it. I knew that the Chinese built the railroads. I did not know they were treated so horribly. I think the thing that enraged me the most was that like 1,200 of them died because we made them build the railroad over the Sierra Nevadas, and then we excluded them from the photograph at the end, celebrating the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad because we didn't like brown folks in the picture.
Yeah, so we're going to go to Promontory Point, Utah as soon as we possibly can and bring some version of Asian food with us and eat it at the park.
Well, probably we should do, we should find some really good Chinese food. So I mean, this documentary series really just outlines what it says. It does what it says on the tin. It outlines the history of Asian people from Asia, all parts of Asia, immigrating to parts of the United States throughout the history of the United States. Certainly the largest influx at the start was Chinese and Japanese immigrants that came and then worked in industry and in the railroads. But it travels all the way up into about 2012 in the documentary. And it's really well done, really well written. They bring in and amplify voices of only Asian Americans and Asian folks, including experts, journalists, artistic producers, academics, you name it. It's all Asian folks and Asian American folks. So that was really fantastic. And if you watched our one-off coverage of the documentary Crip Camp, which is coming out similar around the same time to this video, you'll know that we've kind of gotten to this place in our viewing and discussing of things where we know we need to unlearn the history that we do know of the world, of America, whatever, and relearn it through the lens of these marginalized groups. And I was pretty shocked and disgusted, and sometimes to relearn parts of American history through the lens of what Asian folks and Asian American folks went through over the course of 250 years. So, I mean, that's the biggest lesson. There's so many things I learned that I had never heard about. I really do think discrimination against Asian Americans is like the untold secret. Like I feel like we talk about discrimination against Black folks not as well as we could do and not as productively, certainly. But I remember, the LA riots. I remember Rodney King. I don't remember any discussion of the intersection of Black communities and Korean communities in South LA. We never heard about the murder of Vincent Chin in Detroit in 1982 and the massive protest movement that it sparked.
No idea. I had no idea that the DREAM Act was actually formed around an Asian American youth.
No.
I had no idea that Title IX we have to thank, but with an Asian American lawmaker by the name of, excuse me while I flip to my notes because I was so incredibly impressed, Mrs. Patsy Mink.
Oh yeah, Patsy Mink was a baller.
Yeah, and she's why we have Title IX, and had no idea.
Never heard of her.
I also didn't know the incredible emotional significance of Bruce Lee. I was really glad that was explored.
That was fascinating. I was just thinking as you were talking about Patsy Mink too, Anime Wong, and they do a whole.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
They do a whole part of an episode, y'all, about like Asians in Hollywood and Asian stereotypes and like the roles that they were given and the two main Asian American celebrities at the time. There was one man and then the woman, Anime Wong, and like what they went through.
But also how they treated those experiences so differently. And because you must watch this.
Yeah, give me the cinematic history of just about anything. But I think I've certainly explored diversity in cinema, in the history of the United States cinema a lot. But I think I relearned some things that were really significant. And one of the things that I relearned was the impact of the Chinese Revolution on the treatment of Chinese Americans and Chinese migrants.
Yeah.
And the rise of communism and the connection of the Cold War with growing discrimination against Chinese Americans. I learned about McCarthy and in the House of Un-American Activities, I did not
Which
learn.
We did not talk about enough anyway.
And I did not learn when I learned about it that they targeted a lot of Asian Americans and Chinese Americans.
Certainly not.
No, because of that association that they were
should have put that together, but did not
put that together. Yeah, I think learning about the difficult position that Japanese Americans were placed in, and they tell the story of, and I'm not going to remember his last name, but Buddy is the first name, and this family of like 9 siblings.
Yes.
And Buddy was one of the older ones, and he's kind of been written out of the family history because he did everything he was supposed to as an Asian American, as the model minority, growing up prior to the Second World War.
Is it the Uno family?
Unos, yes. I believe that is it. Yeah, Buddy Uno. And, got a degree, I think was an engineer or something, could not get a job in his field at all. So he moved to Japan and was accepted there because he was just an engineer and he looked like everybody else. And he ended up becoming like sympathetic to the Japanese Empire in the Second World War. And like, wow, was that a story to tell. And some of his family members joined the US forces and like they fought against each other when we were fighting over occupied Philippines. And so every episode is chocked full of stuff like that. And there's a lot of things that I was forced to relearn, even just through this documentary series, about what I thought I understood.
You should see, we have a Slack channel for books that we need to read, and it
exploded.
It just began to bleed. Like, we were like, oh, we have to do everything.
Oh, we know nothing. Got it. Yeah, the other thing that we loved talking about with each other was the Grape Strike in Southern California.
Guys. So, and this could be because I went to social work school in Texas, but I learned a lot about the United States farm workers in my MSW program. And do you know what I never learned? That was actually started by Filipino sharecroppers.
Filipino migrant farm workers in Southern California.
Told me.
What? And they unionized, and then they convinced, and then Cesar Chavez came up from Mexico and was like, what's going on? Why are you mad at, because the Filipino workers went on strike and then the Mexican workers like took their place. Yeah. And so then they had to convince like the Mexican farm workers, and they joined and formed the United Farm Workers Union. What?
Also, I have lived in this part of the world for most of my life, as we've talked about. I had been to Ellis Island. I could do the tour for you at Ellis Island. Never in my life have I heard of Angel Island.
Very good tour guide. Yeah, and it was so funny in my notes because I wrote down, oh, it's the Ellis Island of the West Coast. And then like a minute later, your woman's like, it's nothing like the Ellis Island of the West Coast. And I was like, deleting note. What is it like? Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the fact that we made it illegal, like we wouldn't allow Filipino men to marry Filipino women, and then we wouldn't allow Filipino women to immigrate. That's it. And then we wouldn't allow Filipino men to marry white women. And so we had a whole generation of Filipino bachelors.
Or how about it made it illegal for you to immigrate if you were a Chinese laborer.
Yeah.
But it was okay if you were a Chinese person with a degree.
Yeah.
How about it's the Chinese people were the very first people that were forced to carry papers, and we created the immigration system for them.
And I think this is one of those things where, so much of the world, obviously, this is the biggest understatement I've ever said in my life. So much of the world and the way we see the world changed after 9/11, and certainly immigration and migration,
And we were college freshmen when 9/11 happened. So to place us in a very specific generational, we were college freshmen.
And they get into it at the end of the final episode a little bit about how 9/11 killed the DREAM Act, which is terrible. And I did not know that. But I think when we talk about immigration in the States, we talk about either like white European immigration that was like made the melting pot, or we talk about
Mexican and Latina and
like
other Latin American.
brown immigration from South America, Central America, and Mexico, and like across the southern border. And to learn that Asian Americans formed so much of the foundational history of our country throughout the span of its history, and that we don't talk about it, is not surprising because, white supremacy dominated society, people who write the history, blah, blah, blah. We've said all of these kind of cliched statements.
But like, we went to good schools.
Yeah, that was the thing we kept saying, was like, I went to a really good high school. Like
we had a blue ribbon and everything. And then I went to a good college. We have master's degrees from good places. Our PhD is from an international location, but still a well-known one.
Yeah. And like, I think
nothing.
I think that was the thing that was like, the thing that maybe has to die for both of us, is that like, we were very privileged and went to good educational institutions from like,
from birth onwards. Like
my parents moved into the neighborhood in my hometown in Colorado so that I could go to that elementary school, middle school, and high school.
Same with Yardley for us. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the same with that part of Colorado Springs. And that was an exceptionally privileged thing to do. And I recognize it, and I got a great education, and I got a great undergraduate education and postgraduate education. But like, there's no amount of that when the structures are built to maintain the whiteness of it all. There will always be things that you won't learn. Like, there's no amount of a good education or good intentioned teachers or classes that can do all of that. I mean, my undergraduate college, I took a class on Native American literature because it was in Colorado. And that was fantastic. That was eye-opening. That I love a lot of Native and Indigenous writers because of that class. I learned a lot about their experiences. But like, that was not an area where we had a high population of Asian immigrants. And so you get things left out of the story. And so there's so much work we just have to keep doing. We didn't even get to Hawaiian statehood and like the story of Hawaii. But
we'll hit a pause on that because Hawaii is a stop on our Colonizers World Tour. So
circle back
with us later on in the year, and we'll talk a whole week about Hawaii.
Oh my gosh, I learned so much about Hawaii and Asian American immigrants and why we gave Hawaii statehood.
There's a really great Sarah Vowell book about it too. So we'll make sure to, I haven't read it in a couple years. I'll reread it in order for that week because it's brilliant. It's a brilliant book.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, as you can tell, like, they were very rich episodes.
We will be talking about this conservatively for the next 30 years.
If you want to talk about the overused metaphor of like the tip of the iceberg, like, but this is y'all.
It definitely is.
This is what it is, and like, I'm working my way through my anger at the power structures and the systems and why we don't learn this. So I can get to the place where I'm just like, look at all this stuff I have to learn. But right now, because I just finished watching it last week, I'm still a little bit angry. But as this documentary showed us, it's possible through activism to change some of those systems. It is because of Asian Americans and their solidarity with other marginalized groups that we have ethnic studies departments and majors. Prior to that, there was, I think they said only Black studies existed as like a marginalized course. So, we can chip away at this, but one of the easy and free ways that you can chip away at this is by watching this PBS documentary series.
Cannot recommend it enough. 5 hours of your life well spent. And then we've said this in a couple other things that we have covered this year, but come learn with us. We'll be spending the rest of this year reviewing the books that we learned about. We followed a whole slew of new people on Twitter, a bunch of new holidays to celebrate that we had never heard of before. And we're going to be leaning into this as much as we can. So please join us on our journey. If you are watching this, as always, and have something to say, we want to hear it. So please comment wherever you're listening to this. If you would like to contribute to our Welcome to Our World series and share a lived experience of being an Asian American or an Asian immigrant of any fashion, we would love to hear it and love to give you that platform in any way that we can. In the meantime, we will be consuming other things that make us angry and then processing them for our hot-ish takes. And we wish you the righteousness that comes with anger without the depression.
Until next time, everybody.
Bye.